after the Greeks, there came something which is referred to as the dark Christian Middle Ages, which were not only Christian but also something else, and which were not that dark after all. But this is the reference you will very often find, the dark Christian Middle Ages. And this denomination of this period has a lot to do, of course, with the fact that this name has been given a posteriori, in hindsight, and that is from the period of the Renaissance on. In the period of the Renaissance, and there was a refocusing on the physical world, on the sensual world, and for this a return to the Greek tradition. And so the Renaissance was a philosophical also, a return to the Greeks. And it is the focus on the physical world, on the sensual world, that is arguably, or has arguably been very important for the creation of modern science and of our modern universities. Still today, of course, physical sciences are very important topics in our universities. But not only engineering, in some sense, became important to develop our technology, to develop also, or leading to the Industrial Revolution and the colonial enterprise of the 19th century. I will come to that. But also the return to the sensual world, to the physical world, and the abnegation of the importance of Christianity and of the Middle Ages has also set in the development of an anti-theological intellectual trend, and this trend has become modern academic philosophy. Modern academic philosophy is in its also introduced in our universities, is essentially a reaction towards the theological movements that were outside of the, of course we do know we have Catholic universities, but this is basically the exception to the rule, because theology was not considered to be academic in this context of return to Greek philosophy. Now, in the 19th century, when Europe was in contact with the East Asia, we see a change in attitude in some sense. In the 18th century, so century prior to the 19th century, the 18th century was very important for Jesuit missions, and these Jesuit missions, they were started first by the Portuguese, but very soon taken over in absolute numbers by Italians and French and missionaries, and then later the Protestant missionaries, especially from the Anglican context. In the 18th century, we see that the Jesuits, who are an important denomination in the missionary activity, following the Franciscans, who were there before them, that they have a very positive attitude, or at least we see that from their letters and their reports back to Europe, that they have a very positive projection and portrayal of the East Asian world. And again, in hindsight, this has a lot to do with the attempt to convince secular rulers, Louis XIV to name one, to be favorable to the missions. And this positive portrayal is, how to say, this positive portrayal has to, or is explained by the fact that they say, well, you know, maybe the Chinese are now, have distrayed from the correct path because they believe in all kinds of folk religions and superstition. I will come also to that term later on, the term superstition. But in their past, they also had something that is similar to a monotheistic religion, and so there is a root of possibility that we can bring them to the correct faith. And this changes drastically in the 19th century. In the 19th century, we see that through the development of academia in the European context, that a new term is being created, the term that we know from the English literature as wisdom. So wisdom is not philosophy, it's inferior to philosophy. So we may, of course, naively think, wow, the Europeans considered the Chinese as having wisdom, that's a good thing. But basically it was negative. Wisdom is not philosophy, and wisdom is not the true religion of theology, of Christian theology. Wisdom is something that impregnates the life of, the cultural life of the non-developed people. That's wisdom. It's a negative term. Another development is that through the contacts with the outside world, seen from Europe, that there is also the development of a new field of academic research, which is the field of comparative religion. And this, of course, is completely to be understood, as I said, also already from the 18th century, in a sense. If you want to convert someone, then you have to find the similarities on which you can encroach. And if you need similarities, then you have to compare. So basically, the domain, the academic domain of comparative philosophy is the product of the missionary movement. If it would not have been for that, we would not have had comparative religion and comparative philosophy. So in this context, this development that is related to this paradigms of philosophy, religion, and wisdom are important for the creation of Confucianism as a world religion. Sorry, I was looking if there is some water, probably. Do you have some? If not, but yeah, okay. This is a quotation I have taken from a very interesting work. It's not as such dealing with India, with China, but with India. But of course, it's very illustrative of the intellectual development of this 19th century. Philosophy required a demarcated area of non-philosophy in order to define itself. So philosophy became the opposite of the theology which was associated with the Christian Middle Ages. This also relates to other terms I have put there, natural philosophy. Natural philosophy is something that then, look at Taoism, that is to be conceived in the concept of wisdom, where you have your daily life, which is impregnated in your cultural attitudes, which are fully integrated in a religious context. Metaphysics is also something that is, beyond the physical world. So this is something different. Philosophy does not relate to metaphysics. Metaphysics is the domain of the religion. theology, of course, also is, and this is also, dank u wel, Inge. This is also different, of course, from superstition. And here I can refer to a very influential, still very influential article, which was written by Pierre Bourdieu already in 1971. It's a dated article, but it's still very influential. Title of the article is Genèse et structure des champs religieux, so the origin and structure of the religious field, in which he, also importantly for my story, says that religion, a true religion, a orthodox religion, that this denomination has everything to do with power. That at some point, some people who have power, who are in power, have the power to define what is an official religion and what is a superstition. This is true, of course, in all contexts, even today. It is, in the end, an official ministry of the secular society who defines which religions are accepted and which are so-called sectarian. But this is a very arbitrary designation, of course. So, and this is important, of course, also this context for indeed saying what is in China, this cannot be a true religion. And this is the power I referred to, the secular power of the French kings and the Italian and so on, that are coupled with, or that lead to a definition of what is a true religion. This whole development cannot be seen free from a very important political development and economic development, which is the colonial period. And that leads, that is interconnected with that. And an interesting quote is by this man, Hans Morgenthau, who is considered to be the father of realist theories in international relations. I will not deal with that as such, and this was a topic of the previous lectures, but it is interesting in also the context of creating Confucianism as a world religion. He says that after the Napoleonic Wars, there was a kind of a consensus in Europe that it was totally irrelevant to further fight among the European countries. So after the Napoleonic Wars, you have a kind of a restructuring of the map of Europe, so that the countries keep each other in balance. And this is the Conference of Vienna. That has been very important basically until the world wars of the 20th century. And that this was also leading to the conviction, and this is the quote I have here of Morgenthau, that rather than taking up arms against each other, it would be so much better to expand into the politically empty spaces of Africa and Asia. And this is indeed what happened. This is the dynamics that started, or that are related to the start of the colonial period. We will not fight among each other. We will bring our norms, our religion to the outside world. Another political scientist, and then I don't have political scientists anymore. Another political scientist, also a very influential work, says that it is as it were that the conviction existed in 19th century Europe after the Napoleonic Wars and the Congress of Vienna, that and the gradual that there was a choice. either one would gradually reproduce oneself in all parts of the world, so we would make the rest of the world look like the West. If we would not do that, then the only other possibility was that we would descend into irrationality, that we would reduce ourselves, to use the words of other slides, that we would reduce ourselves to the level of wisdom, which is not rational. It was taking over the other or being taken over by the other, in a sense. This was the attitude of the 19th century. And I can illustrate that attitude from lots of philosophical works that were written in the 19th century. And I have taken a few examples to illustrate and to summarize my story up to here. This was early 1837 publication, Geschichte der Philosophie dargestellt nach den Fortschritten ihrer wissenschaftlichen Entwicklung. I think the title is wonderful. The history of philosophy demonstrated according to the advance in science. Philosophy was science, religion was not science, and wisdom is not science. Our history of philosophy can only be the Greco-Roman Christian one, going back to the Greeks, over the Romans to the Christians. It is true that the greater cultivation of the Asian people was still making a strong impression upon the Greeks at the time of the great Attic thinkers. Yet the Greeks thought for themselves and freely among themselves, and the Greeks alone found their way to clear scientific thought. Chinese are not scientific. I don't say that. For this reason, I adduce the laws of autonomous thinking alone, following which I see a youthful, healthy, and strong spirit assist and constitute itself in Greece. The Asians are degenerate, old, dejected, not rational. Sorry, Huan Yi. Okay. Same period, all the same, we do not need to search for any foreign sources. We don't have to study the other. It's the others who have to study us to become like the West. The philosophical science of the Greeks may be completely explained by recalling the spirit, the devices, and the educational status of the Hellenic tribes. If there has ever been a people which was suited to generate its sciences on its own, it was the Greek. Very symbolic for this Renaissanceistic movement leading to the 19th century. And the next one clearly shows that wisdom is a negative term. No Asian people has lifted itself to the heights of free human contemplation from which philosophy issues. So everything that is not philosophy is bad. Philosophy is the fruit of the Hellenic spirit. And I can even have some more shocking statements. Philosophy as a science could not originate among the Nordic peoples, who are distinguished through their strength and courage, but do not have culture. Nor among the Orientals, who are indeed capable of producing the elements of a higher culture, but who tend more to passively preserve such elements rather than improve them through mental activity. This is the wisdom. They are impregnated by their tradition and they cannot come out of it through rational thinking. We have to go and help them. But solely among the Hellenes, who harmoniously unite mental power and receptivity with themselves. lots of quotations. It really was, you know, the common understanding, apparently. All these books are full of this kind of idea. Among the Orientals, speculation generally remains so much in the service of religion and the individual sciences that we cannot speak of them as having a philosophy in the actual sense. The Indians form an exception. This is the Buddhism. While their thinking is also closely associated with religion, it is not bound to it in the same degree, exhibiting a very respectable cultivation, especially in the direction of metaphysics and logic. So the Indians, yeah, maybe we can think about it, but the Chinese, no. And still on India, without being known too well, it has existed for millennia in the imagination of the Europeans as a wonderland. Its fame, which it has always had with regard to its treasures, both its natural ones and in particular its wisdom, has lured man there. We have been lured to the wisdom of the Indians. Then we didn't have to think, you know. But now we are rational, we know that this is, you know, you can't do that. And then this is, I think, the last one of this series. Yeah. The Orient, the East, cannot teach the West. Its tradition is a matter of the past. It has never reached the level of philosophy and science, which is a genuinely and uniquely European achievement. This is the context in which Confucianism became a world religion. But I will further explain how we come there. This is a contemporary philosopher who asks the question and then answers the question, why does one want to wish to compare Greek and Chinese antiquity, and which he of which I give you the, or point to the last few lines. It is all has to do with instruments of those in power. This is what it boils down to. And then also a contemporary Chinese, well, she's a specialist in Chinese literature, working at UCLA, who says about this period, there was an idea that one had to have an expansive knowledge of understanding the world, which is the West, but Western intellectuals did apparently not feel the need to know anything of the non-West. One of the slides or the quotations I have given you mentioned the concept of culture. Now, culture is a very interesting term if you look at what culture is. We speak about culture, I mean, without really, you know, much giving it much second thought. What does that mean, a culture? Of course, as a philologist, I have to do that, and I found some interesting concepts about what culture is. This is by Zygmunt Bauman, a very interesting social philosopher. Recommendable literature. It's you know, almost Christmas time. Culture is a term for management of human thought and behavior, and it was conceived inside a family of concepts that included terms like cultivation, husbandry, and breeding. What a farmer did to the seed through attentive care all the way from seedling to crop could and ought to be done to incipient human beings by education and training. Humans were not born but made. They needed to become human. And in the course of becoming human, they had to be guided by other humans, educated and trained in the art of educating and training humans. This is what we do. When we determine cultures, this has a creative, it's not something that is there. It is something we impose on others. We have, to humanize them. It says also the famous philosopher Adorno, culture, no matter what form it takes, is to be measured by norms not inherent to it and which have nothing to do with the equality of the object, but rather with some type of abstract standards imposed from without. It is someone who says of another that he is cultivated or not, in the sense, to the degree that he has been shaped according to norms by the other. And this is, of course, true within one culture. I mean, we educate according to some normative standards our children and grandchildren. But of course, the problem comes for the 19th century when we start to cultivate the others and start to determine how they should be the copy of the West, because they're not cultivated yet. This is a very basic, important idea for the whole colonial enterprise, of course. I know you are now very silent, but this is also what I always say to my students. The only thing I can do is make you think. Okay. Okay. Friedrich Max Müller and how Confucianism became a world religion. I have given you the broad context, cultural, political, the definition of what is a religion, what is a philosophy, what is wisdom, who says so. The origin in this context of comparative religion as an academic field. And I have constantly said that it is us, Europeans, who have imposed all these concepts on the other. Now I have to kind of prove that, of course. Otherwise I would be preaching. So, okay, I will try to prove it. The oldest existing etymological dictionary of the Chinese language, Shuowen Jiezi, explanation of simple graphs and of compound graphs, was written or compiled in 100 of the Common Era. Rest assured, I do not know all the publishing dates of all Chinese books by heart, but this one is so easy that I know it, 100 of the Common Era. We read the word Ru, and Ru, this is the term, the group of people in China who we have called Confucians used to call themselves. There is no traditionally Chinese Confucian who will call himself Confucian. This is a Western invention. Derived from Kung Fuzi, Master Kung, as if he was the head of a religious sect or something. The Chinese say it's Ru. And if you look, they call themselves Ru, not Confucian. And if you look at this etymological dictionary, what Ru means, it is a term for intellectuals who are trained in the arts. There's nothing religious about that. It's intellectuals who know the 6 arts, and the 6 arts are shooting with a bow, mathematics, music. It's nothing religious. This is an invention. And of course you can say, well, yes, this is a dictionary, haha. Well, then let's look what the master himself said. What does Confucius himself say? Well, the master, that's Confucius, said to one of his disciples, Dessein, you are a Ru of the noble type, not a Ru of the inferior type. So it's apparently, it's logical, a degree in intellectual hierarchy. This has nothing to do with religion. The master has said a lot. But okay, a few more quotations of what the master has said. Devoting oneself to mankind and having respect for the ghosts, keeping them at a distance, this is wisdom. It's not my translation. We can discuss the wisdom there, but I could have translated it myself. Knowledge would probably be better than wisdom. Anyway, it says, and this is clear, that you have to devote yourself to mankind and keep away from everything that is in the supernatural. And he also said at another occasion, when it is not even possible to fulfill one's duties with respect to men, how can then you fulfill your duties with respect to the ghosts? When you don't even understand life, how can you then try to imagine what death is all about? I don't see very many religious aspects there. Confucius say, be a good intellectual and your job is here. And ghosts, and maybe there is something that there, but you could at most call it agnostic, but even that is maybe too far already going into the religious direction to say that. I don't see anything religious in Confucianism. And if it is indeed intellectuals who you can put into hierarchy, then this relates, of course, to civil government. Indeed, these people were the people who were in civil government. And we have calculated that. That's about 6% of the Chinese population. And the other people, the 94%, were not Confucians, not by definition, or by definition not. They believed in folk religion, they were religious people, but they didn't believe in Confucianism. Well, you can't believe in Confucianism because it's not a religion. But they were not even belonging to the Confucians. This was the upper part of society, 6% of Chinese society, and the rest were folk religion, which includes Taoism, for instance, Buddhism. These are the creeds of the people, not Confucianism. Former colleague, Rick Pinkston, whom I every now and then on Sunday morning meet in the supermarket, has written many interesting books. One of them is Goddelijke Fantasie over religie, leren en identiteit. And this is a quote from that book, where he says that religion is the result of the fact that human beings want to position themselves vis-à-vis the cosmos in which they are living. What am I doing here? Who am I? And also in relation to other human beings. And there are different possibilities to do that. This also explains indeed why there are different religions in the world. And they are in a cultural, sorry for the word, context, generation after generation, giving sense. This can take different forms. And this is related to these two things. The question, where the term, once again, sorry, philology, where the term religion comes from. What does religion actually mean? And religion is, yes and no, related to two concepts, religere and religare. And the original meaning of religion is the first select. That is to say, there are different ways in which, in a certain context, people have positioned themselves in the world and among other human beings. And this has then transgenerationally been transmitted to children, grandchildren, and so on, and becomes something like what we call a culture. Religion interpreted as connecting is one of the options. This is the Christian option. This is the Islamic option, and this is the Judaic option. But there are many other options in the world. The Christian option, the Islamic option, the Judaic option, sometimes called also the religions of the book. And this is, well, I will come to that. And the religions of the book have opted in their transmission to develop a dual system. You have the world of the gods and you have the world of the human beings. But this does not have to be the case. You can also have a holistic view, and this is the Chinese view. The Taoists and even the Confucians are holistic. The Confucians did not say there are no ghosts. The Confucians said they are there, but don't interfere with that. In a dual system, as a true Christian, you have to deal with it. Because your purpose of your life is rebirth in Christ. You cannot say, I don't care about it. And of course, there you have different denominations. And you have also within the Protestant Christianity, even some groups who think of themselves as the ultimate group who will survive. And they will survive because they are in the correct relation in the dual system to God. This is a very different type of religion. This explains also, so of course, you will now say to me, yes, but the Confucians do something as veneration of the forefathers. Yes, so what? This is not a dual system, because they venerate the forefathers. They don't venerate God. God does not exist as such. It's not monotheistic. Confucians venerate, and this has also continued to exist in this, if you want, religious concept within the common population. They venerate the forefathers because the forefathers have the power to intervene in this world. There is a transgenerational connection, but it's not a theological connection. It's a transgenerational connection, which is very different. And this you have in Confucianism. And this you don't have in monotheistic religions. I know, food for thought. The term religion is even not a Chinese term. the Chinese have a Chinese version of the term Zhongjiao, which we translate as religion, and it is indeed a term that is a 19th century term introduced in China through Japan, that was also modernizing, but this is a very modern term, the term religion. Of course, there was no religion. Not in the sense, as we, and then this also meant that Mixin, that's heterodoxy, that for or because of the introduction of Christianity in the missionary movement, that all Chinese religions, forgive me the word, I don't have another one, that all Chinese religions were considered to be sectarian, heterodox, untrue, and so on, in the eyes of course, the missionaries. The difficulty to bring this new concept into the Chinese context has been famously illustrated in the policies of two emperors, Emperor Kangxi and Emperor Yongjing. There were indeed Christian converts in China, and the question was whether, when they were now Christian converts, whether it would still be possible that they obeyed to their Confucian rituals. And Kangxi Emperor said, okay, that's fine, I don't care. And the Pope said, no way, this is impossible, he cannot do that. Of course, from his papal position, he had a point, of course. I mean, you cannot venerate as a Confucian turned into Christian, you cannot venerate your emperor and simultaneously venerate the God of the Christians. This is impossible. And this then led to it that a subsequent emperor, Yongjing, and I see you have, 22, 23, this is, okay, forbid Catholicism. So for him, Catholicism was to be forbidden. Kang Youwei, this is a modern Chinese philosopher. He was confronted, if you look at his time period, confronted with declining Chinese empire that also had suffered losses in the war against the Brits, and then also later on against the French and so on. And there was a interpretation. It's a very complicated period, but one of the analysis that was made on why is China weak and why has China suffered under the power of the weapons with which I started, the result of the Industrial Revolution. So how come? And one of the analysis was that the strength of Europe was the unity of the nation states, which is of course a totally absurd analysis. There is not one unified European nation state in the sense that you would have one language and one ethnic group and one religion. There is not one such state, but this was the interpretation by the Chinese. And this explains why Christianity, that was modern, part of the modern world, was in the endeavor by some Chinese intellectuals to also become modern and overcome this conflict, if you want, with the Western world. Why Kang Youwei created his new concept of Kongjiao, Confucianism, the religion of Confucius. The idea that if all the Chinese, as I said, it's only 6%, But the idea that if all Chinese would become Confucian, that then they would be strong and would be able, just as the West, have a unifying religion and cope with the West. And this is a very interesting step in the creation already of Confucianism as a world religion. And I come to my last part of my food for thought. Mr. Bodem, of which I did not immediately find a picture, of the East India Company, Lieutenant Colonel, as I said, a military man. He, so at University of Oxford, that's where we have to position ourselves now for what comes, for the last part. We go to Oxford, and some academic infighting. In 1832, colonial period for Britain. In 1832, this Lieutenant Colonel Bodem of the East India Company, a very important economic enterprise, of course, suggested to create at University of Oxford a chair for Indian studies. Again, not so much to learn about the Indians, but to impose our ideas on the Indians. What he says, a more general knowledge and critical knowledge of the Sanskrit language will be a means of enabling his countrymen to proceed in the conversion of the natives of India to the Christian religion. This was the purpose. At the University of Oxford, we need a chair in Indology so that we can convert the Indians. We will do that by disseminating a knowledge of the sacred scriptures amongst them more effectively than all other means whatever. And we do have, at that point, a professorship. In 1832, someone is becoming professor of Indian studies in Oxford. And in 1860, the chair is vacant in 1860, and a new professor has to be nominated. And there are two rivals. It's academic infighting. It's pity for Confucianism, but Confucianism is in the end a religion because there were two academics who were infighting. The one was Sir Monier Williams, a very good Indologist. His dictionary is still on my desk. So, and Friedrich Max Müller. And Friedrich Max Müller was teaching some Indian materials at some college, and he was kind of very, very unhappy because he was not the big professor of Oxford. Luckily, of course, this is pleads for Oxford, not Max Müller got the position, but Sir Monier Williams became the new professor of Indian studies in Oxford in 1860. And Friedrich Max Müller was angry. But Friedrich Max Müller knew about the number 4 in my pictures, James Legge. James Legge, who had created his series, the Chinese classics. There's not such a thing as the Chinese classics. The Chinese classics are made after the format, in modern speak, of the Bible, and this has to be the core of the religion. And he took up contact, Max Müller, took up contact with James Legge, who had created these Chinese classics in his series, The Wisdom of the East. Not philosophy, not the wisdom of the East. They had a nice conversation. I have not read through their letters myself, but a colleague has gone through of Princeton University, has analyzed the letters between Müller and Legge, leading to it that in the end, in this whole context I have explained, of connections, expansion, putting our norms there, and so on, and that in the end, Friedrich Max Müller did not become what he so dearly wanted, the second professor of Indian studies in Oxford, but became the first professor of comparative religion. And to have comparative religion, China had to have a religion. And this was Confucianism. And don't say it's not true, but even Kang Youwei said there is something as a religion. Yeah? But this was, of course, a reaction again to the presence of the Europeans. Müller says the following in the letter to Legge, in the letter which is embedded in the context of what he named himself, Friedrich Max Müller, my project of world religions. I mean, my project, it's very close in this sense to the culture, of course, of how we can see it. And we possess the whole Sanskrit canon, he said, of the Buddhists in various languages. But the ancient religions of China, again, that of Confucius, but that's not a religion. And that of Lao Tzu, that's not a religion. Not in the sense of a dual system as we have in the Abrahamic system, may now be studied in excellent translations of their sacred books. They're not sacred books, that's an invention by anybody interested in the ancient fate of mankind. This is what Müller says to Legge, you know why? Because this was for him you see, I can become a professor of comparative religion because the Chinese have a religion, you said so. Part of the correspondence with James Legge. Legge says, I use the term Confucianism as covering, first of all, the ancient religion of China. But this is rubbish. And then the views of the great philosopher himself in illustration or modification of it, his views as committed to writing by himself or transmitted in the narratives of his disciples. Very Christian attitude. The case is pretty much as when we comprehend under Christianity the records and teachings of the Old Testament as well as those of the New. But how can you say that in Confucianism there is something that is similar to an Old and a New Testament? I will now give a view of some of the religious thoughts of the fathers of the Chinese people, the fruits of which are found in the beliefs of their descendants down to the present day. In doing so, I will go back to a period long anterior to the composition of the most ancient Chinese books and glance with you at some of the primitive written characters. Even their script is primitive. Of course, if you want to express wisdom, you need a primitive script, of course. We shall be in the position of the Aryan philologists who, from the root words of Sanskrit and other kind of languages, in his answer to Müller, Sanskrit, try to give us pictures of the earliest Aryan life, as for instance, our first example shall be the character Tian, the symbol of heaven. Its application must have been first to the visible sky, but all along the course of history, it has also been used as we use heaven with capital H when we intend the ruling power with capital P. Chinese heaven is the same as the Christian heaven. I don't think so. The Chinese heaven is the collective of all our forefathers. And we venerate our own forefathers. I will not venerate your forefathers, because then my forefathers will be very angry. Whose providence embraces all. Professor Max Muller says, in Chinese, Tian denoted sky or day, and the same word, like the Aryan dew, is recognized as the name of God. It's not. Last slide. This is the colleague of Princeton who has analyzed all these letters. She's quite, I'm still friendly if I compare it to her. Friedrich Max Müller knew nothing about Chinese language nor Chinese religion. And although James Legge was Max Müller's only informant, it was the depth of Legge's knowledge in both the Chinese language and religion, as well as the prestige of Legge's position as the first professor of Chinese at Oxford, that make Legge invaluable to the establishment and legitimation of the new discourse that Max Müller sought to promote, the new discourse being the creation of world religions. And he needed religion. Max Müller's boundary work brought him lasting fame and a luminous reputation as the founder of a discipline, as I just said, whereas Legge's boundary work secured his interpretation, I have to put it in italics, his interpretation of Confucianism as part of the world religion discourse. And so that is why, if you nowadays look at an atlas of the world religions, you will see that all Chinese believe in the Confucian God. It's a religion. Okay.
Thank you, Bart, for sharing your insights on this very interesting subject, going over the dynamics of the start of colonial times, over the definitions of philosophy, religion, wisdom, all this versus the rationale, who are the Confucians. Very interesting indeed, and indeed also a lot of food for thought, which we still need to process, I think, a little bit. But I would like to give the floor to some people who would like to ask you one specific question. So let us start with a round of questions, if that's okay. Jasper?
Thank you, Bart, for the interesting presentation. First of all, I noted that the term "mi-sin," that you wrote a secret letter accidentally instead of superstition, but that doesn't matter.
Did I put the wrong me, my dear?
I mean, it happens to me too. I mean,
yes, I did. Sorry.
But that doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's, you know.
But I wanted
sorry.
I wanted to talk about was exactly the term Zongjiao. Just a little background on that.
Yeah.
It was actually already used in China before the 19th century in Buddhist texts to refer to the higher truth of Buddhism, but it did not contain religion.
No.
And then in the 19th century, after the Meiji Restoration, the Japanese wanted to separate Shintoism, Shentao, from all the other religions that they could think of. They wanted to protect Shintoism's central position, and they made up the term Zongjiao to refer to all the other Shukyu, to refer to all the other religions. But what I wanted to ask actually on Zongjiao is what Yang Fenggang once has stated as there is no orthodoxy in the term Zongjiao, only orthopraxy. And I was wondering what you think of that.
Lots of questions in one. Sorry about me. Indeed, this is, you type me shin and you, okay. We are in a 19th century. We are in a very vulnerable period also of lexicographical and lexicological developments. Zongjiao, in its Buddhist meaning, is sectarian, I would say. So, because Jiao is the doctrine or something like that, we can also discuss about this. And the Zong is being used as a term to refer to denominations within the larger field of Buddhism. So in that sense, it does not, but it changes and it develops, as I said, and this is a period of, lexical developments that are quite, abundant and complex and confusing. So the Zhongzhou here is no more sectarian in the sense that it refers to a official orthodoxy, I would say. The Shinto, same thing. I mean, Shinto is a creation in the 19th century. No Japanese before the 19th century would recognize Shintoism as an official religion. It's a creation of the 19th century. I'm sorry. Shinto is not the original religion of Japan. Shinto is a 19th century creation in the same context. With the same kind of, endeavors they were confronted with. And you still had a third part of your question, sorry. Yes, in that regard. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, yeah. As I said, if you look at Confucians in China, this is the elite who call themselves Ru, who don't call themselves Confucian, and is about 6% of the Chinese population throughout history. The rest are not Confucians. They do believe in all kinds of things. Folk religion, Taoism, and so on, Buddhism. This is, how to say, in this sense, there is freedom of religion. All kinds of religion whatsoever, no one cares. Until the moment that religious activities, and this is not typical Chinese, this is in all, I would say, secular states the case, until the moment that the Confucians would consider religious activities as threatening or appearing to threaten their position as secular leaders. And this even goes so far that also, and it shows indeed, I mean, you cannot, it's a very Christian saying, you cannot serve two gods. Well, in the Chinese context, I would say even if an emperor or someone of the Confucian elite, this person can, in his private life, fully believe as a religious system whatever is, available. This is not a problem. I mean, it's not a problem for a Confucian emperor to be a Buddhist. Until, again, the moment that his Buddhist faith would be perceived by the other Confucians as infringing on his authority as a secular ruler, then they would say, no, you're going too far. So there is this constant dynamics there. And we do know and this is even today the case. As a member of the ruling political party, you can, by definition, not be a religious adherent, but we do know that practice is very different. So again, this is not a problem, as long as it does not infringe on state power. So in this, I don't know if the latter part gets to your point. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe one more question here, and then we can all proceed to the cafe upstairs, the Krook Café, where we can continue our round of discussion over some sandwiches and a little bit of a drink, if you will all agree.
Thank you, Professor, for your generous food of thoughts. And one part of it I found particularly delicious is when you is your negation to the claim that to consider Confucianism as a religion, predominantly due to a lack of metaphysical worldview at Confucianism doctrine. For example, the dual worldview, and especially the emphasis on the metaphysical, supernatural world. This part is not present in the Confucianism doctrine.
Nope.
But I'm wondering, is there a, how to say, less strong understanding on the term religion? For example, religion.
It's a loaded term, I know.
Loaded term, but it's a loaded term indeed. And it, for example, religion does not only provides us with metaphysical worldview, but also provide us with a kind of system of value.
Yeah.
Or in an Occidental term, teleological guide, to use the Greek root, the word telos. And this part of religion is quite present in Confucian doctrine.
Yes.
For example, when he said 君君臣臣父父子子, how one should behave, how the emperor should behave, how the minister should behave, how husband and wife should behave. 父为臣纲, 父为妻纲, 君为臣纲. And I think another part of this less strong view on religion can be a political hierarchy. In the emphasis on political hierarchy in Confucianism. And this made Confucianism particularly susceptible to religious interpretation after Confucius. And worse, we could say this makes Confucianism particularly susceptible to ideological manipulation after Confucius. For example, when this creates let's say the history of reception of Confucianism in Chinese history, when political atmosphere, political circumstances change in China. For example, in the beginning, in the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, Confucius is a object to be cracked down, let's say. And after the reform and opening up in the 80s of last century, Confucius became a matter of interest among people. Yes.
Okay.
That is my commentary.
Okay, good. Thanks for the comments. Where do I start? Religion, as I said, religion, well, there is, if you look where the term actually comes from, it is about a choice you make in the different ways a human being can position herself or himself vis-a-vis other human beings, vis-a-vis the cosmos, and so on. And the religion, as we know it from Christianity, is one particular form of interpretation, but it's not the only possible form of interpretation. So, but that means that all of these systems are all, if I kind of use your words, are all guidelines in some sense. And you can, as an individual being, this is, I would say, our individual choice. We can find in some religious inspiration, be it Christianity or Islam or name it, a moral guideline. And this is very well possible. And there is, this is perfectly okay. But you can, of course, also as a human being, find your guideline in what we then would call humanistic principles. This is equally a guideline. So the guideline you follow in your moral behavior, your categorical imperative, Immanuel Kant would say, is not unique. There are different options that have developed in different cultural contexts. And I would say in our multicultural environment in which we are now, this is, well, we see all kinds of these interpretations simultaneously, which then has led also to the concept of civil religion. That is, civil religion is a kind of the common denominator that is growing without laws or anything, but that is growing within a given multicultural society. If my neighbor is a Christian and my other neighbor is a Muslim, and still another neighbor is a humanist, I mean, we do share some guidelines in common. Interesting is also what you say that Chen Chen Fu Fu, this is very civil, and I think this is very interesting also. Indeed, I mean, and if you look at the so-called 5, in practice 6 cardinal relations by Tung Jung Shu, it's which is early period of the Common Era. This is secular relations. It's always about secular relations. It's the relation between husband and wife. It's the relation between brothers and brothers, between friends. But it's never about the relation with God. Of course not. Cannot be, because it's not a religion in the sense of a Christian religion or of an Islam or of. And this is indeed where you have the humanistic aspect in Confucianism. We have to become good human beings. We have a civil moral guideline. And the civil moral guideline is part of a holistic system where there are gods, but these gods are basically our own forefathers who have, through their workings in society, shown the way how also we should behave in society. Yeah, as a few remarks to your remarks.
Okay, thank you, Bart.
Thank you for being here, and thank you also online.
Thank you, everybody, and I hope that some of you will still join us upstairs to continue our round of discussion. Before you go, you saw that there were still some magnets on the chairs, and I would like to say one final thing about this. We were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the China Lecture Café Series this year, so 10 years. We had our China platform, also 15th anniversary this year. Well, due to a reflection exercise within Ghent University just recently decided to change the name and scope of some of its platforms. One of the platforms that will change its name and its scope is the China platform. So from now onwards, this is the last event where you still see our China platform banner and our China platform magnets. We will take a wider approach together with Japan and South Korea in our regional platform. So we will no longer be the China platform, but we will further continue our work and our activities under the East Asia platform. That's also the fact for the Russia platform that changed its name and scope to East, and our Asian Plus platform on the ASEAN and South Asia, which will now be the ASEAN and South Asia platform. So should you need more information on this, you can find me. I'm very happy to give you more information. But thank you one more time. And next year, I'm sure we can bring something interesting again, maybe under another name. I don't know yet. But please, now let us all together proceed and grab a bite and continue our discussion. Thank you to everybody.